Hey guys, I kind of been down a rabbit hole and I found this video of Trevor Noah talking to Veronica Ivy, who is a trans woman athlete, about the topic of trans women in women's sports. Yeah, new format, just something I'm trying out. Let me know what you think.
Veronica Ivy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, I'm going to say from the top, because I've noticed this happens in every conversation. Every time you bring up trans rights, or if you have a discussion and you say trans, people tense up. I understand why. We live in a world where now there are people who are so transphobic that it makes it almost impossible for people who aren't to ask any questions, to have any conversations, to have any discourse that doesn't lump them in with transphobia. And so I'm really glad that you're joining us on the show to talk about this, because it feels like one of the biggest issues in America, and yet no one can seem to talk about it. So let's start with your journey. You've competed at some of the highest levels in sports. And as your hoodie says, sport is a human right. That is what you believe in. Talk me through just a little bit of why you believe fighting for transgender athletes to compete in the categories they'd like to in sport is so important.
So it's a fundamental tenet of the Olympic movement that sport is a human right. So in their Olympic charter, in their fourth fundamental principle of Olympism, they say participation in sport is a human right, and they mean that at the competitive level. Mm-hmm. So this issue, people like to say that it's a complicated issue, and I don't actually think it is. I think it's very simple. It all boils down to, do you actually think that trans women and intersex women are real women?
Okay, I'm gonna, oh, the next line's important.
And are really female or not? And
Okay, so that's very important right there. Do you think trans women are really women and really female? So I feel like you're acknowledging that woman and female are not the same thing in that moment right there. I I have so many thoughts about this. I'm gonna go back. I'm sorry, this is so all over the place. I have so many thoughts about this that I don't even know where to start, and it goes from one to another so quick. I'm just gonna do this again.
people like to say that it's a complicated issue, and I don't actually think it is. I think it's very simple. It all boils down to, do you actually think that trans women and intersex women are
Okay, so trans women and intersex women. This is interesting because I talked in my last couple of videos about how all of this was explained to me. You know, trans women are women. There's a difference between your sex and your gender. That's where the concept of being trans comes from. If your gender does not align with the gender that's assigned, the gender that is assigned to your biological sex, that's something that's a whole nother topic, right? Because if you're talking about sex versus gender, and you're saying, because that's what it was originally, your gender does not align with your sex, you are transgender, right? And then transsexual was someone who makes the full transition, right? That's originally the way I understood it. My understanding of what transgender meant really changed when I found out that non-binary people were also considered trans. That's another topic. There's so much to talk about here. I'm I'm just getting started with this. I'm gonna try to not keep this too long, but if I get off track a couple of times, please don't blame me. I feel so strongly about this, and I feel like I really need to talk about it. But the big point that you heard when this first really started getting media coverage was the intersex argument, right? There are people who are intersex, and I feel like the the topic of intersex people only now comes in when it's in a situation like this. Like, do you think that trans women and intersex women are real women? Now, where I'm going with this is when I was, you know, in this movement on Tumblr, and I started getting really confused, I kind of talked about how I tried to like do my own research and educate myself like I had been told to. And I was having a really hard time understanding the connection between like trans women equating to intersex women when they were lumped in like this. Because again, at the beginning, it was, oh, you don't think, people can be trans. What about intersex children who were, given sex reassignment surgery at birth? What do you think of them? And I was like, I always had this confusion of like, what does that have to do with being born biologically, anatomically, stereotypically, the definition of one of the sexes, either male or female, and attempting to live your life and transition to the opposite have to do with intersex babies who were not born like that being given like non-consensual surgeries, you know? Um, I never got that connection. I think that the intersex argument is convenient to throw in there with the trans argument. I don't think there's a connection there. I don't think it's the same thing to be born a certain way. And the term that I was using for it, no, 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 sorry, not that I was using. The term that I heard for it on Tumblr was different. It was assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth, right? Which is, you came out, someone looked at you and said that, oh, this baby is a girl because they have female anatomy, or male, or they're a boy because they have male anatomy, which again, that's contradictory because but it's contradictory, but it makes sense. Like there's like bits and pieces that make sense, as in like I understand the assignment of gender associated with assumed sex at birth, but your sex at birth is not an assignment. It's a description. It's not an assignment, it's a description. The gender and the roles and the expectations that are pushed on you because of the definition of whichever sex you fit at birth is an assignment. Gender is assigned at birth, sex is not. So the whole assigned female, assigned male at birth was one of the things that I always had issues with. But back to the intersex topic, um, the term that I heard used for people who had been born what was considered intersex and given some type of corrective surgery was coercively assigned male or female at birth, right? Which is unnecessary. Like I do understand why it's coercive, but I think the terms AFAB, assigned female at birth, and AMAB, assigned male at birth, should only apply to intersex people. And you wouldn't know that until, you found out that you were intersex, unless it was obvious to the doctor when you came out. But I've kind of gone off on a tangent. I was talking about the research that I was doing um about intersex condition and these topics. I actually have the National Geographic magazine that they did a couple years back on gender ideology. And I remember I went to my friend's house and it was sitting on their table. And I read through it some and had a good long talk with my friend. And I came out of it more confused because we seemed to be on the same page. And I don't think he had read it. I think one of his parents bought it or something, maybe, or they got a subscription. I don't know where it came from, but I don't think he had read it, and he actually found out that he did not agree with it. We talked about intersex condition a lot because that's what my questions were, and um, I don't know, I was kind of asking questions. He seems like he knew something about it. So like I specifically remember when I was reading the magazine that it used intersex condition in like the opening page in the very introduction of it. But um like as a reason for someone to not identify with, you know, that's so complicated. Like this is how weird this is. There isn't even proper terminology for discussing intersex condition. That's how like pushed to the side this has been. This has been so, I don't, is this what scapegoating is? Like when you like, no, I don't think so. I don't know what scapegoating means. I know what a scapegoat is, but like I don't understand how people use scapegoating as like a euphemism, not a euphemism for a, I don't, oh my God, I'm so mixed up right now. I don't know what I'm saying. Um, but I don't know, being used, um, being lumped in together with something that is not the same as them. Yeah, being born one way and having a doctor decide that you should be another way without your consent is not the same as being born one way and making the conscious decision to try to live the other way. I don't see the relation between that. That seems like a completely separate experience that should not be associated with trans people, in my personal opinion. Um, I don't know. We're only a minute and 32 seconds in. I'm gonna keep this going. I hope I made my point, but like I couldn't I couldn't find any answers on intersex condition. The information was so conflicting and varied so much between sources that it didn't make any sense. And I couldn't find any visual references. And I'm not saying that, I'm looking for pictures of, you know, people's genitalia. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is we have medical diagrams of male and female anatomy that is used for educational purposes. If intersex condition is as common as people say it is, people say it's as common as being redheaded, I don't understand why there is not adequate medical documentation of it. People document anomalies, right? If if there really was this, and I did read that there were many different types of intersex condition. That was the only consistent part of the research that I did across all of these, activism websites, again, across all of these like forums and things like that. And that's part of what led me to, I don't know, like I said, kind of leave the movement a couple of years ago. Um, but yeah, let me get on with this.
Real women and are really female or not.
Okay, so I think I kind of already talked about that. You're kind of acknowledging that woman and female are not the same thing, but in the same breath saying that it is because you had to specify. And I think that is very telling.
And if you do, it's very simple. Just stop policing who counts as a real woman.
Okay, so what at this point does a real woman mean? I cannot tell you because I don't know. That's why it is so important for us to get back to the separation of sex and gender. They are not the same thing. Woman is a gender. I think that you can identify as a woman. It does not mean you are female. And I'm sorry, but having your penis inverted and put inside of you does not make you female because that is reducing females and what we go through. I just hit the mic. It's reducing us to that. That's it. Is that one part of us. And there is so much more. There is so much more.
Because this has had history of racism built into it over the years. It's not an accident that the intersex athletes who get singled out are women of color from the global south.
Why aren't we talking about that? I haven't heard anything about that. Why isn't that something we're talking about? If anyone actually watches this and gets this far and could link me something to that, I I don't I don't hear anyone talking about intersex people. I haven't in years. That's what my point was just now.
Because who gets singled out for scrutiny is based on white women's conceptions of femininity.
I think that's interesting because you're a white woman. Like, I don't, like, what is your concept of femininity?
And that's being weaponized against trans people too. So it's a fear of protecting the fragile, weak, cis white woman from the rest of us.
So
Um, I think that's just generally an offensive statement to make. And it sucks that the public is brainwashed enough that that got applause. That kind of sucks.
there are many elements to what you said, which I appreciate.
That's
So
very
let's try
true.
to break them down.
Okay.
One thing that confuses me personally is it seems like we have discussions about who should participate in which category and how. You know, on the face of it, it seems simple as you say. You know, if somebody identifies as a woman, if they're transgender, they can compete against women who were born biologically, and then if not, then not. But then there are many who would argue who are not transphobes. There are many who born biologically women who will say, but you have an unnatural advantage over me, and that makes the sport unfair. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, there's lots of ways you can respond to that. So the first is the very language of you were
Oh, this is
born and I'm
lunacy. I
not
remember
biological
this.
somehow. Like I don't think I'm a cyborg.
Okay, I'm just gonna play this first.
So like this idea that like, oh, you're not a biological woman. Well, I am a woman, that's a fact. I am female, so all my identity records, my racing license, my medical records all say female, right? And I'm pretty sure I'm made of biological stuff, so I'm a biological female as well. So this question of do trans women have an advantage over cis women? We don't know.
Okay, I'm gonna pause right there before Veronica goes on to the next subject. Um, that was a really silly thing to say. Um, because by that logic, I could say, well, I identify as a cat, and I'm not a cyborg, I'm biological. So I am a biological cat, and you need to respect that. Like, what the hell would that even mean? What does that mean? Like, I identify as this and I'm biological. Like, it's, and how Veronica's saying, I don't even know. I'm so torn on pronouns right now. For the time being, I'm gonna say she. Uh,
I'm pretty sure I'm made of biological stuff, so I'm a biological female as well. So this question of, do trans women have an advantage over cis women? We don't know. In fact, there's basically no published research on this question. However, there's good reason to think that there isn't, but I think it's irrelevant because we allow all kinds of competitive advantages within women's sport. So one example I'd love to talk about is the 2016 Rio Olympic women's high jump final. First place was over 6'3", 10th place was 5'5". So a 10.5-inch height difference between first and 10th at the Olympics in high jump.
Right.
And we call that fair.
Okay.
So
I think this speaks to something a little bit different. I'm not an expert on the whole Title IX situation going down and the history of women competing in sports at the professional level or anything like that. But I thought the point of it was to give women opportunities, females opportunities, because we are specifically discriminated against in sports because we're female. Not because we're women, but because we are specifically female. Because again, there's a separation between sex and gender. And the case that we're talking about is specifically sex discrimination. And I'm sorry, but the fact that Veronica claims to be a trans woman means that she is male. Now, before I started questioning things, I did not have a problem with someone saying that they were a male woman or a female man, because I think as far as the idea of being transgender goes, that actually makes a lot of sense. I don't know how I feel about it now. I don't, my head is spinning with this stuff right now. But I think this is kind of the point I was getting to, is that um this goes back to taking opportunities away from females. Remember, female is a sex, woman is a gender, versus male and man, right? Um, I think I could spend all day spiraling into, the rights and opportunities aspect of like I don't understand where co-ed went. Like, why can't trans people just play co-ed sports? Like, there's already like a gender neutral category for sports. Why do females have to potentially suffer and give in because of trans women? That sounded a little harsher than I intended it to, and uh Trevor actually talks about that toward the end of this, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going.
range of body types within the female category is way, way bigger than anything that could be attributed to trans women. So if there's an advantage, and I'm not saying that there is, for trans women in women's sport, it's not an unfair advantage. But also, we've been competing at
I think that's completely disregarding the differences in average performance between the sexes, not the genders, between the sexes of male and female. Um, there's I'm not going to sit here and give you a lecture in the differences between male and female, because I think you probably at some level, whether you drink the Kool-Aid for this or not, understand the differences between the words male and female. So I'm not going to go into that, but yeah.
trying to compete at the highest level for decades, who've been allowed to compete for decades. And no one has won an elite world championship. No one has.
Why hasn't that made the news? Why are we just now talking about it then? I feel like you're telling me that trans people have been competing, then what rights are you fighting for in sports? Why has this not made the news up until now? Why has nobody heard about this? Where is this information coming from? Again, if anyone has any information that sees this about exactly, how long trans people have been competing in the sport of their gender, that in in the category of their sport that co-aligns with their gender identity. Because I thought the reason that the Leah Thomas situation was such a big deal was because this hasn't happened before. And that's why these laws are going into place. Like I'm lost here. And this is exactly what I was talking about with the circles of nonsense and contradictory statements that made me leave the movement in the first place. So
Won an Olympic gold medal. This Tokyo Olympics was the first time trans women even qualified for the Olympics. So this idea that trans women are suddenly going to take over women's sport is an irrational fear of trans women, which is the dictionary definition of transphobia.
So it's interesting that you say that, because it's interesting that you say that because I think if I were to push back, or even not even playing devil's advocate, there are a few things that could be argued. Number one, you could argue that although the trans woman who competed in the Olympics didn't dominate, she did beat a field of women who might have qualified for that position, right?
yes.
Secondly, when you talk about the height differences, I agree with this completely, but there are many who would argue that we exist in a state where a lot of the surgeries are new, a lot of the technology, just the technology is new. Transgenderism is not new. We know it throughout time, we've seen it throughout
Yes.
history. But
Yes.
there are many who would say, how do we ensure that we are creating some sort of standard? And the reason we talk to this is, we talk about this is, it's the reason they have to regulate performance-enhancing drugs. For instance, what is fair? What can you drink? What can you not drink? What can you consume? What can you not consume? Some would say, if you are born that way, that's how sport has determined who goes where. And then some would say, no, regardless of who you are, you should be able to compete. My question then comes in from a really, honestly, a different place. I look at somebody like Oscar Pistorius from South Africa, right? He was the double amputee.
Yep.
And Oscar Pistorius actually went, well, I want to compete in the able-bodied race, right? And people were like, well, do you have an advantage? Do you not, et cetera, because of the prosthetics. But then could there not be an argument, if there is no advantage in that then trans women should be able to compete, but in the men's races then, because they'd still be able to compete
Yes.
in the sport?
But they're women, and they're female.
But they're women. Did you see that little? But they're women. But they're women. The little tantrum. They're, but they're women. I'm sorry, that was kind of mean, but
So
but they're women and they're female. But they're women and they're female. That's interesting. Because, like, again, acknowledging that woman and female are not the same thing and attempting to associate them the same way. I,
So, like I said, this boils down to, are trans women really women?
women, but not female. And again, what is a real woman? If gender is a social construct, if gender is a social construct, then there is no such thing. Like, I don't understand how we got from, men wearing makeup for music in, you know, the late 20th century, and, I don't know when men wearing skirts became a thing. What, the 80s? I associate it with like the 90s mainly, but I think it was a thing in the 80s. What, like, didn't like Depeche Mode and like um Kurt Cobain wear like skirts and stuff like that or something like that? Like, this is 80s, 90s of this like gender bending type of thing. I don't understand how we backtrack so far to if you want to look feminine, this it's I don't know. I'm not really making a point here. I just there's so many different things to talk about. I'm not doing a very good job with this, guys. I'm sorry. This is my first time. I don't know how to do one of these. I have no script. I'm going off the top of my head. But boils down to, are trans women really women? So you say they're women and they're female. Are they really women? But you didn't say, are they really female? Because you know damn well that trans women are not female. And that's what this is actually about, female spaces. The problem is society has always associated woman with a female person, a woman as a description of a female person. And the words have been changed, the dialogue has been changed, the conversation has been changed. I think there's a lot of, because of the vagueness of a lot of these terms and the way they're used, I think a lot of people are not actually on the same page and they think that they are. And I think that's something that's happening right now, is that people are starting to realize, whoa, that's not what I meant when I said that, but we're almost getting to a point where it might be too late. And that's kind of why I want to talk about this stuff. So I'm rambling, but I'll get back to the video.
Are they really female? Because if you
No.
think yes, then we belong competing with other women. So it's
Okay.
an extreme indignity to say, I believe you're
Well,
a
I don't.
woman, except for sport, right? So
I
you
believe
can't
you're a
single
woman. I
out one of
believe
the
you're not
most
female.
important facets of our society. We are obsessed with sport. Athletes are some of the most highly praised, highly paid people on the planet.
Definitely.
So you can't say that, like, I believe you and I support you, but not for this one really big thing that society really cares about.
Right, and
Because you're not
I'm
female.
saying I get confused by why we distill it down into just two things. I'll tell you why.
This is a really
As
good
we
point.
learn about gender being a spectrum, as we learn that people can identify in a multitude of ways, we accept the fact that we don't have to put people into categories of man or woman. That's why they say protect trans women. It's like, otherwise, which women are you protecting? It's an argument that doesn't separate or diminish anybody, but gives more specificity to what people are saying. And so when we talk about these things, I sometimes get confused by why we're trying to force the people into two again, when we've been taught that there isn't a two. Whereas a sport like, let's say boxing, for instance. In boxing, people fight across all weight categories. They don't just go men's boxing, women's boxing. They go, no, men, heavyweight, super heavyweight, and then they'll be like middleweight, bantamweight, flyweight, featherweight. There's like guys who weigh nothing punching each other. And I mean this genuinely. I've always thought to myself, it's interesting how in boxing they went, well, we don't just want to see guys fighting. We want to see guys fighting at different weights. The UFC does the same thing. They go, you're going to fight in your weight class, which has, it seems crazy. How can you break it down? And yet it's worked. And so I wonder if you've ever considered, and I'm not saying it's your job, by the way, but if you've ever considered
It kind
a world.
of literally is.
Oh, then great. Have you ever considered a world where it becomes
Attitude.
more specific then? The same thing they did in the Paralympics. They had to find a way where they classified how a single amputee could run against somebody who's partially blind, or a double amputee, and how do we grade that? So do you not think that we're limiting ourselves by saying men's sports, women's sports, when we now know that there's so many more genders?
So I'm really going to dissatisfy you right now.
Well, you don't know what I'm looking for, though, so you can't.
I do. I know you're looking for something other than what I'm going to say, and that is a
okay.
very important question and a very difficult question, but it's a separate question.
It's really not. Okay, what's the question we're talking
The
about?
question we're talking about is, given how sport is currently structured, should we
Yeah.
include trans women and intersex women in women's sport?
Okay, here you're doing it again. You are saying basically that intersex and transgender are the same thing. And I do not see how they are. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Hmm. But like intersex women are not the ones making the news. Like why is there no information on something that's supposed to be so common? I would love resources where I could understand more about intersex condition because apparently I'm not very good at doing research. And again, when I did my research, I could not find proper, reliable information. Um, but okay.
And my answer to that is a clear yes. If you want to say, should we revisit how we structure all of sport? I would say, yeah, we should do that. But if your only reason for doing that is because you can't just accept trans women or women, that's a problem I got with you.
I understand, and I'm not saying it's
Trans
because
women are
people
not
can't. No, no,
female.
I hear what you're saying. No, I completely hear what you're saying. So let me ask you this then. You know, again, eliminating fringes, because everything on the internet becomes fringe. Everything becomes a fight and an argument. If somebody comes to you in good faith, and I mean genuinely good faith, and they say to you, you know, Veronica, I was born a woman, raised a woman. I've suffered or lived and experienced life as a woman. This is where I am. This is where my body has gotten me to. I've grown as a woman. My body has had the testosterone or estrogen that it had to get me to this point, and that's why I am here. And I feel like you may or may not have the advantage, but we don't know yet. So why can't we wait to know these things before you compete against me?
This is
How would you respond
interesting.
to that?
Because that's not how human rights work. So the way human rights work is that the default is inclusion and the burden of proof is on the people seeking to exclude, not the people seeking to include.
The eye
So-
roll. The eye roll. It's disrespectful. I really appreciate the way Trevor handled this. I take a sip of my drink. But I do think Trevor did a good job of approaching this situation. Of course, he had to tread very lightly because of exactly what we're talking about right now. But I think it all comes back to sex versus gender. People are trying to say that sex and gender are the same thing, and they're not. It's the entire argument for people being transgender in the first place. And I think the people,
I want to share something shocking with everybody. It wasn't until 5 years ago that we actually studied the relationship between natural testosterone and performance. And we found that there's no relationship whatsoever between unaltered, natural, endogenous testosterone and sport performance. About 0.5% of elite male track and field athletes at the world championship level are below the women's average of testosterone, competing with men with 80 to 100 times as much testosterone at no competitive disadvantage. And that fact has
wait,
not been
what?
picked up by the broader
Go
media
back, go back,
landscape.
go back, go
So,
back.
so
We need to listen to
I
that
want to
again.
share something shocking with everybody. It wasn't until 5 years ago that we actually studied the relationship between natural testosterone and performance. And we found that there's no relationship whatsoever between unaltered, natural, endogenous testosterone and sport performance. About 0.5% of elite male track and field athletes at the world championship level are below the women's average of testosterone.
0.5%. So half of a percent. So 99.5% of them are above the women's average. What is your point here?
Competing with men with 80 to 100 times as much testosterone at no competitive disadvantage. And that fact has not been picked.
What? There's probably a reason that that few are below. Like, I don't understand what the point is here.
Up by the broader media landscape. So when you say I'm a woman and I have this much testosterone, well, first there's a huge range within women.
Definitely.
Into the male range. And there is no relationship between her having a competitive advantage over women with lower testosterone. So there are elite.
Actually, I did hear something about, and I guess you could bring this back to something that Veronica said earlier about um, this coming back on, I guess, non-white women. But I did hear a case where there was a black woman who was, I think she was a track and field athlete, and she had high testosterone levels, and there was like a controversy about her competing in the sport. So just as a comparison to the number of cases,
Cis men with low testosterone, lower than a given woman, who's out competing her. So our bodies and biology is not this simple. We thought it was.
what are the odds that a trans woman is going to have lower testosterone levels than a cis woman naturally? I actually don't know. But if we're saying on average, we have to take into account the fact that males, on average, obviously, because it's the male hormone, have more testosterone. Obviously, I don't know why I have to explain this. Like this is baffling to me.
And it isn't. So we know that when you add testosterone to your natural levels, like doping, you tend to get bigger, stronger, faster. We also know that when you drop your testosterone levels, like trans women tend to do, you tend to get slower. But what
Right.
your natural level is has no relationship to your sport performance.
What? I don't even know what. Wait, say it again. What?
Elite cis men with low testosterone, lower than a given woman, who's out competing her. So our bodies and biology is not this simple. We thought it was, and it isn't. So we know that when
Okay.
you add testosterone to your natural levels, like doping, you tend to get bigger, stronger, faster. We also
Right.
know that when you drop your testosterone levels, like trans women tend to do, you tend to get slower. But what your
Okay.
natural level is has no relationship to your sport performance.
Okay, so mm, the first thing that's coming to mind is like Leah Thomas, right? When we're talking about this Title IX issue. I think that, my God, say it again. I can't even keep track. What?
This simple. We thought it was, and it isn't. So we know that when you add testosterone to your natural levels, like doping, you tend to get bigger, stronger, faster. We also know that when you drop your testosterone levels, like trans women tend to do, you tend to get slower. But what your natural level is has no relationship to your sport performance. And
That's just not true. Because we're not talking about males across the men's category. We're talking about males in the women's category. And it isn't, that's boiling it down to just testosterone levels when the issue is male puberty. Is that why I was so confused? Because this is, I feel like I'm being gaslit here.
we've been singling out that factor, testosterone, against the scientific evidence.
I don't think we're singling out testosterone. I think we're pointing out the differences between male and female, specifically after female and male puberty, specifically after puberty, for a reason. And you're saying this now. Like I don't think anyone is arguing that it's only testosterone levels.
But I'm a little confused, and forgive me if I'm slow to understand this. You just said the natural level doesn't give you an advantage or a disadvantage, but you said if people do have an addition or a subtraction of it, then it does give you a disadvantage or an advantage.
Well, it affects things. So for example, like my body doesn't produce testosterone, and it hasn't for a decade. But I switched sports from a road cycling event to a track power event, and I switched training, and I put on 25 pounds of muscle, and I went from being able to squat 170 to 375.
Isn't 25 pounds of muscle like a lot? Do you think that you were able to build 25 pounds of muscle because of when did you switch? Like this is so vague and disjointed, and I'm having a hard time following. Like I have so many questions, and that's kind of why I'm making this video. I guess maybe this is a chance to circle back to that, like I'm not making this to start a fight, okay? I am genuinely like curious. Like I am so confused. This stuff just doesn't make any sense.
So I don't produce any testosterone, and I squat a lot. And that's
Yeah,
just because I
because
changed training. So
no,
it's not so simple as, okay, if you drop
because if it was all about training, then there would be no talk about this. If all you had to do was give a female the same training that you had to have this female gain 25 pounds of muscle and potentially compete at the same level that you do, it just wouldn't work. I don't know what you're talking about.
your testosterone, you will get weaker. Because if you change your training, your diet, your rest and recovery, your sport, your performance can change.
Your body will change. It seems like we're always
That was
going to end up
contradictory.
in a cul-de-sac.
I'm gonna cut Trevor off here because he couldn't I just want to speak up for him. He couldn't have gone any farther into that conversation without some serious backlash, I don't think. But whatever Veronica just said or was trying to say, I don't think it made any sense. And I think Trevor tried to call her out for contradictory statements. And The fact that he couldn't go any further speaks to our current social climate.
Because many people use it as a cudgel, I've realized, to scare people. Oh, the transgenders are coming for you, your bathrooms, your sports,
we
your
are.
everything.
That's terrifying.
Be
Be careful what you say. There you go. That's scary.
But it feels like there are many discussions to be had. It feels like, as you said, you know, the research, the science, everything hasn't caught up. But I appreciate you for coming on the show and discussing this with us. Thank you so much for joining me.
Okay, well, that's kind of that. I've never made a video like this before, guys. I'm sorry this was so disjointed. I don't know what I'm doing. Um, Maybe next time, if y'all like this, I'll try to put an actual script together. Um, but yeah, this was an attempt. And let me know how you like it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And thanks for watching.